What's the difference between government and parliament? In the next few minutes, we're going to become experts in the difference between government and parliament, so buckle up and get ready to understand. Let's open with this vital piece of information, which might be news to you. Government and parliament are not the same thing. That's right, they are not the same thing. Whilst it's the government's job to run the country, the job of parliament is to represent the people, that's us, and hold the government to account. So who are the government and parliament? To explain, let's start from an event with which we are all familiar, the general election. At a general election, we each have the opportunity to vote in our constituency, that's the area we live in, for the person we want to represent us and our area in Parliament. Different candidates from different political parties stand for election. So in the fictional constituency of West Zooshire, we've got Charlotte for the Cat Party, Bob for the Bear Party, Rachel for the Rabbit Party, and Marco for the Monkey Party. We cast our vote for the candidate we want, either in advance as a postal vote or on polling day. Then the results are announced. The candidate with the most votes becomes the Member of Parliament, also known as MP, for our constituency. And at a general election, an MP is voted in every constituency in the UK. The party with the most elected MPs becomes the party in power, the governing party. If no party wins by a majority, we get what's called a hung parliament. Then, one of two things happens. Either they form a minority government, or they form a coalition, which means they decide to work with one or more other parties. Now, let's take an example where the Cat Party gets the most elected MPs. That means they get into power. So the leader of the Cat Party, Charlotte, becomes Prime Minister, and that makes her head of the government. She then chooses other Cat Party MPs, who were also elected in their constituencies, to fill different roles in her government, like Home Secretary, Secretary of State for Education, Secretary of State for Health, and Chancellor of the Exchequer. For every government department, the Cat Prime Minister selects a Cat MP to head it up. Together, the Cat Prime Minister, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who heads the Treasury, and the other department secretaries, along with a few other MPs in special roles, make up the Cabinet. No, not that kind. Under the department secretaries are departmental ministers, who are also MPs or peers, which we'll come back to. They, the government, are based at Whitehall, just down the road from 10 Downing Street. So that's the government. Remember, it's their job to run the country. But what about Parliament? Well, Parliament is where all the elected MPs get together. So that includes the Cat Prime Minister and her Cat Cabinet, but also all the other Cat MPs who aren't in the Cabinet. They are what's known as backbenchers. It's also where all the elected Rabbit, Bear and Monkey MPs are found. They all congregate in the Houses of Parliament, that big building with Big Ben on the end of it, which is actually the bell, not the tower. In particular, they congregate in the House of Commons. It's the green wing of Parliament. You might have seen pictures on TV of the Prime Minister stood in the Chamber of Commons. Look, it's green. The Chamber of Commons is where a lot of the business takes place. The Prime Minister and the Cabinet sit on one side at the front, whilst the other elected MPs in the Cat Party sit on the benches behind. That's why they're called backbenchers. On the opposite side of the room to the party in power are the elected MPs from the other parties, including the party which is the biggest threat to the party in power, known as the opposition. Now, remember, the job of Parliament is to represent the people and hold the government to account. And they do this in part by having discussions and debates and asking questions of the government in the Chamber of Commons. But I'm not telling you the full story, because there are other people who are also part of Parliament, along with all the elected MPs. They are the Lords and Baronesses. They are also known as peers. No, not that kind. So, let's talk about peers. Who are they? Well, there are two kinds of peers. There are hereditary peers and life peers. Hereditary peers are people who inherit their title and have done for hundreds of years. Life peers, on the other hand, are people who are given the title by the reigning monarch. The title is given on merit and is not inheritable. The Lords and Baronesses gather in the House of Lords, the red wing of the Houses of Parliament. They have got their own chamber where business takes place, the Chamber of Lords. Look, it's red. And just like the MPs discuss the government, country and world in the Chamber of Commons, the Lords and Baronesses do the same in the Chamber of Lords. So that's it. We've got everyone on screen. The government sat at the front on one side in the Chamber of Commons, whilst everyone else on the screen constitutes Parliament. The backbenchers of the governing party sat behind the government. The MPs of the other party sat opposite them, and the lords and baronesses in the Chamber of Lords. So let's recall one final time the difference between the two. The government runs the country, and Parliament represents the people and holds the government to account. So, here's the next question. How do government and Parliament fulfil their roles? The government have lots of people working for them who are experts in different areas, who work out how to make possible the government's ideas and plans for running the country. They are called civil servants, and they too are based in Whitehall. Whereas down the road in Parliament, the backbenchers and peers have different ways to represent the people and hold the government to account. For example, if the government suggests an important idea about an aspect of the country, like the development of HS2, the high-speed railway line planned to link London to the north, before it is allowed to happen, Parliament have to discuss it, or rather debate it. Debates happen in the chambers and take place between both MPs and peers. Another way Parliament represents the people and holds the government to account is with parliamentary questions. That means an MP or a peer will ask a question to the government about an aspect of their running of the country, and the government has to respond. The response might come from the Prime Minister or from one of the ministers working in the relevant government departments. Another way Parliament holds the government to account is with their select committees. What's a select committee, I hear you ask? Well, for every government department there is a parliamentary select committee. So there's the Department for Education in Government, and in Parliament there's the Commons Education Select Committee. The Government Department for Transport is matched with the Commons Transport Select Committee, and there are both Commons Select Committees and Lords Select Committees. Select committees are made up of backbencher MPs of the governing parties, MPs from the other parties, and peers. They are supported by specialist researchers, and it is the Select Committee's job to scrutinise the corresponding government department. To do that, they commission inquiries on different topics they deem important. They gather evidence and then they write reports. Then they send those reports to the relevant government department, who must respond to the Parliamentary Select Committee's findings. There are also a number of select committees on different areas which don't have an equivalent government department. One final way that Parliament holds the government to account is with their all-party parliamentary groups. These are parliamentary interest groups that are open to any MPs and peers. They exist on all sorts of topics, from football to music education to manufacturing. These groups gather together with invited speakers and discuss topics they deem of relevance or interest. They also commission inquiries and feed their findings to Parliament and government. However, they do not carry as much weight as the select committees. Finally, the question remains as to how MPs and peers can be informed to be able to hold the government to account. Well, they each have a library, the Commons and Lords libraries, where they can read up on topics and where library specialists help find information for them on topics of interest. Some of the parliamentarians have their own researchers working for them, and finally there's the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology, an office which serves both the MPs and peers and helps them understand all sorts of topics in science and technology through briefings, reports and events. And there you have it. That's the difference between government and Parliament in a nutshell.